Tonight on Bridge City News, concerns surrounding the Lethbridge supervised consumption site continue. Tonight we hear from supporters of the site and those who want it shut down. The province is ending its master agreement with doctors. We will explain how this may impact healthcare in Alberta. And a new case of the novel coronavirus has been discovered in British Columbia. We will tell you where.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. When you mention the supervised consumption site in Lethbridge, you'll receive a lot of passionate responses from people in the Windy City. As BCN's Loris Alexander discovered today, our region is still quite divided on the issue of the SES at Arches.
I think people forget that it's one of four pillars, and the four pillars, very simply stated, and I might not have them exactly in the right order: housing, which we don't have. We simply don't have adequate housing for people. Another pillar actually is the consumption site. The third one is treatment. We don't really have adequate treatment. We're currently observing the construction of a 30-bed intox/detox center next door to us, and that's a good step. The last of the four pillars is a long-term treatment, long-term care, support, and walk with people. But what we're doing, I think, is we're putting all of our, quote, eggs in one basket.
Regardless, Ginther says his mandate is from beyond this earth, but it's a simple one: to feed the hungry.
The government, I would like the province to state that yes, these kids need somewhere to go. These kids need somewhere to have a home. They can't be lost out here anymore.
It's enabling them. We should be trying to focus on a recovery system. You know, there's got to be, like when I quit drinking, my doctor gave me Librium to take away the withdrawals and the side effects. There's got to be something that we can do for these drugs.
Stefan Amundsen, a Lethbridge business owner, says we're bearing the brunt of the problem.
I had a sister that was an addict, a heroin addict, and passed away. And so I approach this with a lot of compassion. That does not make me an expert on this subject matter. It does not provide me with any better perspective as to the solutions. It just provides me with a little compassion. It's a really tough balance. It's a tough balance between our investment in the community, our investment in a building, our investment in our people. It's not just about dollars and cents for us.
We've existed in our location for 4 years. The SES has only been here for 2. And so we kind of have this view of, like, we have an idea of what the neighborhood was like before the SES, as well as after the SES kind of showed up and started operating. And because we're a little bit further away from the SES site, we're still in proximity, but we're about 4 blocks distant. Our experience in the neighborhood has actually dramatically improved since they opened.
Levi Cox says he supports Arches and has even fundraised for them several times.
I understand the businesses immediately surrounding the site are having issues and difficulties. I've been living and working downtown for over 18 years, so I understand. But I always cannot help that there's this underlining racism that is actually happening. And I hear it in the comments, I hear it from people all the time, and I would like a lot more acceptance and understanding from everybody in Lethbridge and our rural communities and everyone. And I just, it's disheartening to think that this racist undertone survives here in Lethbridge.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Just as Lethbridge deals with an increase in drug crime, comes word that property crimes in Edmonton were up last year. The city's police chief says much of that is due to meth use. A new report shows there were just over 24,000 property crimes reported in our provincial capital. That is a 4.5% increase from 2018. Chief Dale McPhee says a lot of the break-and-enters and the thefts from vehicles is from people trying to get money to support their drug habit. He says violence is more concerning, but it is important for police to get a handle on property crime as well. The father of one of the victims of a 2017 Calgary quadruple murder says he feels sick thinking about the fact that his killer may still be free. Tuadros Kabidi and Louis Yao face life sentences for the first-degree murder of Hanuk Afewerk. The murders, however, of Cody Pfeiffer, Glynis Fox, and Tiffany Ear remain unsolved.
To take so many lives and still sit there like, I almost get the impression like they've done nothing wrong. They don't believe to be here. They're yawning, and the smiles on their face are just, it's more of an insult. It's a big, big stab to the heart, the soul. There is only one place for people like that, and that's off these streets. I don't think it's enough, personally. I think it should be 25 years per count. I think the proper justice should come from them not ever being able to experience any freedoms. The life they once had, it shouldn't be. They belong to a place where it's dark, cold, miserable. But that's still not going to bring Cody back, never will.
The Alberta government is ending its master agreement with doctors, and physicians are not happy about it. The province is imposing new fee rules to curtail costs, which take effect April 1st. President of the Alberta Medical Association, Christine Molnar, says it is a sad day for healthcare in the province. She says the change will disproportionately affect family physicians. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says overall, physician compensation will remain the same of more than $5 billion a year, but other changes need to be made to help the government save around $2 billion over the next few years. Among the changes, doctors will no longer be allowed to bill for more than 65 patients a day. The province will also reduce the amount it pays on extended patient visits. The province is introducing a new funding model to help vulnerable kids across Alberta get the help they need. The government will provide $3.4 million per year for the next 3 years to support child advocacy centres in many regions, including Calgary and Edmonton. Funding has also been set aside for centres in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat should they become operational. The new model will replace the old system of annual grants. Minister of Children's Services Rebecca Schultz says the new funding model will ensure fairness across the province and give families access to the supports they need. The Glenbow Museum in Calgary received a $40 million cash infusion from the provincial government. Premier Jason Kenney, along with Infrastructure Minister Prasad Panda, made the announcement earlier today. The Glenbow has been downtown Calgary's art and history museum for more than 50 years. The extra funding will help with the museum's revitalization project, plus modernizing the building. In a statement, Premier Kenney said, finally, this investment by taxpayers is part of our government's commitment to grow the economy and create jobs by maintaining record investments in infrastructure, even during a time of fiscal restraint. 4 Alberta MPs, including Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner, have published an online manifesto decrying what they say is unfair treatment of Alberta within Confederation. In a tweet, Rempel-Garner says Alberta is not and never has been an equal partner in Confederation, and real structural change is needed. Political reporter Tyler Dawson says this has fueled more talk of separation.
They basically say no ifs, ands, or buts, that Alberta is an unequal partner in Confederation, and if something isn't done to address that, many Albertans are going to vote for independence. They conclude this letter, which is about 13 pages long. They conclude it by saying, one way or another, Albertans will get equality. So it's some pretty strong words in this.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Dawson as he also discusses what we can expect with the throne speech and budget as the legislature returns next week. That's coming up in the second half of our show. The federal Conservatives will choose their new leader in June. Will it be Peter MacKay, Aaron O'Toole? How about Marilyn Gladue? Whoever it is, that person will be tasked with bringing our country together. Now that's according to political science professor from the University of Lethbridge, Dr. Jeffrey Hale.
We are no longer a country in the traditional sense of the term. We are deeply divided on multiple levels: region, ethnicity, language, secular versus religious, and so on and so forth. And we see that with the way so many regional conflicts are reinforcing multiple solitudes in this country. Somebody who can bridge those solitudes in a respectful manner and make people feel that the person can identify with them will go a long way.
Dr. Hale will give us thoughts on who he thinks is the front runner to win the Tory leadership. Watch for that full interview coming up after business news. The Trudeau Liberals are looking to put forward legislation that would ban assault rifles from law-abiding gun owners. BCN's Micah Quinn went to the LFGA shooting sports facility in Lethbridge to speak with local gun owners and get their reactions to the proposed ban.
That's the sound that most gun owners want to keep hearing, but the federal government is proposing a gun ban for Canadians.
If the government's objective is to waste $50 billion, make life miserable for the legitimate firearm owners in Canada, and not in any way impact crime, then it's great legislation, if that's what their goal is.
Kevin Pack brings his grandson to the range to shoot and is a strong supporter of the petition that was signed by over 175,000 people saying they don't want guns to be banned.
The government, with the 175,000 signatures, biggest one in Canada, to not be able to change the legislation without changing the legislation. I believe they're trying to force the government to not go with orders in council in order to, put across these firearms bans, firearms confiscations, etc.
Kevin says that there is a big difference between being a responsible gun owner and what the Trudeau Liberals are proposing to do with this gun ban.
Law-abiding citizens jump through hoops when they're not the ones causing the problems. The law-abiding gun owners, the people that have licenses to possess them, to acquire them, aren't the people committing the crimes with the handguns and with the semi-automatic firearms that they're talking about confiscating from citizens. They're not the ones causing the crimes.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The town of Taber announced today that it'll be hosting the 62nd annual Alberta Firefighters Curling Association Championship next year. It'll mark the first time the event will be held south of Calgary since Lethbridge hosted the event in 1976. It'll take place January 27th through the 30th. Between 24 and 35 teams will be competing to represent Alberta at the Canadian Firefighting Curling Championships to be held later next year. Teams are comprised of career, volunteer, and retired firefighters with a minimum of 1 year of service. Artists in Lethbridge are being invited to think outside of the box. The City of Lethbridge Public Art Program and the Heart of Our City Committee are adding a splash of color to the city by inviting local artists to decorate utility boxes.
This is a really, really exciting initiative that is coming forth from the Art Committee of the City of Lethbridge. It's very much a project that is directed towards our local artists of all sort of ages and skill sets, so it gives great opportunity, and it is a huge beautification program for the city. So it is a utility wrapping box. It will be a pilot project with an artist call to wrap 5 boxes in Galt Gardens, as well as a large utility box at Casa.
Selected artists will receive $500 per utility box for their creations. The Lethbridge Hurricanes will take to the ice tonight against the Moose Jaw Warriors. The bigger story, however, is that this game will have a focus on organ donation and the tremendous impact it's had in our community. The team will also don their retro baby blue jerseys tonight.
Yeah, obviously there's about 4,300 Canadians on the waiting list, and obviously if you're interested in organ donation, make sure you talk to your family and stuff like that, because they carry on your wishes. But it's obviously a very important night for us. It's a very important night for our league. And anytime we can raise awareness for something like that, it's huge for us. Obviously, anytime we can get some cool jerseys on us, it's awesome for us. And you got the nicknames on the back, so it shows a little character to the fans. So I like them. I think they're designed awesome, and it should be fun.
Logan Boulay was a player that was unfortunately killed in the Humboldt crash, and his decision for organ donation saved 6 lives.
Over 1,600 Canadians are put on an organ waitlist each and every year. A woman from BC who recently traveled in Iran is suspected to be the province's 6th case of the novel coronavirus. Provincial Health Officer Bonnie Henry says the 30-year-old woman and her close contacts are currently in isolation.
We are announcing that we do have a new case of COVID-19 here in British Columbia. This is a young woman, a woman in her 30s, who is positive at the testing that was done here at the BC CDC lab. Samples have gone on to the NML for confirmation, but we are confident that this is a true positive. She resides in the Fraser Health region and has recently returned from travel to Iran. Fraser Health is actively investigating the close contacts, and a number have already been put in isolation, and additional information is being gathered even as we speak. We'll be doing a detailed investigation of her travel, when her symptoms started, and determine whether we need to investigate or notify people who are on the aircraft that she returned in. So that brings our total number of cases here in BC to 6.
Protesters in support of the Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs continue to maintain a blockade near Montreal. Their presence forced the closure of a second commuter trail line. CN Rail is seeking an injunction to remove the protesters. Police remain on the scene but have not intervened to remove the protesters. Quebec Premier François Legault says it is up to the authorities as to when and how to enforce the injunction. The blockade is in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en Nation hereditary chiefs in BC who are protesting the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline through their territory. The Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP refused to launch a public interest investigation into RCMP actions on Wet'suwet'en traditional territory. Supporters of the Wet'suwet'en chief spoke in Vancouver today to release the Commission's response.
The Commission found there was no legal authority to require passengers to produce identification at stop checks. The Commission has found there is no legal authority for RCMP to conduct stop checks for the purposes of information gathering. The Commission has found that the concern for public safety that is stated is related to unconfirmed information that is not sufficient to justify an RCMP roadblock. The Commission has found that routine searches of vehicles and individuals conducted by RCMP were not authorized by law. This constitutes a serious violation of Indigenous rights and jurisdiction, a severe deprivation of individual liberty interests, and an egregious impairment of charter-protected rights.
The Manitoba government is planning to transfer ownership of northern airports and ferries to First Nation communities. The province says a preliminary deal was signed with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. It is hoped that some of those assets will be transferred this summer. Details of the deal are still to be worked out. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister says the deal is a good example of reconciliation. He says it will provide economic opportunities and ownership of the transportation system used to supply food, medication, and other goods. The City of Winnipeg is preparing for possible spring flooding. The city is asking the province for funds to stockpile sandbags and emergency equipment that would be deployed in case of a major event. The Winnipeg Public Works Department also wants to purchase an emergency response trailer outfitted with hand tools, temporary dikes, gas pumps, and a generator. Officials say there's a high risk of major flooding along parts of the Red River. Manitoba is expected to release its first spring flood outlook early next week. 2 people were killed and 3 others were injured at a shooting at an apartment complex for seniors in Caldwell, Ohio. A police officer is among the injured and the suspect is among the dead.
So basically what's going to happen is Caldwell Police is going to work the initial call, that call that came in, and so it's going to take a while because you've got crime scenes. We need to make sure that we're scouring the area for property, anything that has to do with the crime. And so when that is done and we feel like it's okay to release, they will be allowed back in.
The main thing I think, that, as the Chief has said, is it's a stable situation right now. And the tragedy along with it, there's a lot to digest for the public and for us as well. So this will take some time to work through everything. And there's not a lot we can give you tonight. We may have more information tomorrow that we could share.
More great family movies are playing at the Mill this weekend, including Spies in Disguise. With more, here's the owner of the Mill, Len Binning, with another Movie Mill Minute.
Greta Gerwig brings her version of Little Women to the big screen. Nominated for Best Picture and winner of the Oscar for Best Costume Design, it's the classic tale of the March Sisters.
Joe, would you like to dance with me?
I can't because I scorched my dress, and Meg told me to keep still so no one would see it.
I have an idea of how we can manage.
Spies in Disguise is an animated family picture starring Will Smith and Tom Holland. The two couldn't be more opposite. One is a super sleuth spy, the other is a scientist. However, Lance has to go undercover as a pigeon.
I have something that can help. It's called biodynamic concealment. Imagine if I can make you disappear. Hey, Lance, look at me.
Look at you? I can see my butt and your face at the same time.
That is so cool.
Look like great movies at the Mill once again. A nice weekend is shaping up with sunshine and mild temperatures. And if you're a skier, we have some good news for you. The BCN Ski Report, along with a complete look at the weather forecast, are coming up. It should be quite mild if you're thinking of going to Castle Mountain this weekend. The BCN Ski Report is on deck, but first, a look at the weather forecast with Jeanette Roche.
Today's weather highlights are brought to you by Aqua Steam Services. For award-winning carpet and upholstery cleaning, experience the clean difference with Aqua Steam Services.
Yeah, the weekend weather is looking pretty decent, Hal. Tonight, the overnight low is -1, and there's going to be some wind gusts up to 60 km. Into tomorrow, we're going to see a mix of sun and cloud, a high of 6 degrees. Wind gusts, though, up to 70 km. Now, looking ahead to Sunday, there is going to be a 40% chance of flurries or showers, so watch out for that. The high that day, 2 degrees. 2 degrees continuing into Monday with a mix of sun and cloud, and then dropping to 0 for Tuesday, and then climbing again for Wednesday and Thursday with highs of 4 degrees and 6 degrees for those days. Fairly sunny skies next week with some scattered clouds, though. Now, the almanac highs and lows for this time of year, 2 degrees being the high for the average. The average low is -10. We're definitely in that range and even higher. So the high temperature on this day was recorded back in 1973. It was 16 degrees, and the chilliest day was back in 1957, it was -26. The sun rose this morning at 7:31 a.m. and it set just before 6 p.m. at 5:59 tonight. Now, over on the west coast, looking to tomorrow, showers expected there. Victoria's high 9 degrees, 8 degrees expected in Vancouver. Up in Edmonton, 4 degrees expected tomorrow, and a high of 6 degrees for Saturday in Calgary with lots of sunshine. Edmonton is expecting some snow flurries. So same thing for Saskatoon. They could see a possibility of some flurries with high of 0. High of 3 degrees in Regina and 1 degrees over in Winnipeg with lots of sunshine. Nice to see the plus temperatures over in that region finally. And same thing for the Toronto area, high of 4 degrees. 1 degree is expected to be the high over in Ottawa. They could see a possibility of some flurries tomorrow there. 1 degree is also the expected high in Montreal tomorrow with a mix of scattered clouds. Lots of sunshine in Fredericton tomorrow with a high of 0, high of 1 degree in Halifax. They could see some snow. Same thing for Charlottetown with a high of -1. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, their high expected to be -5 with a mix of sun and cloud. Finally, they're not snowing anymore. Take it away with the ski report, Hal.
Here is today's BCN ski report, looking at accumulations over the last 72 hours. No new snow in Marmot Basin, but there's still a 132 centimeter base. Castle Mountain has had 1 centimeter of fresh snow and a 248 centimeter base. Sunshine Village has had 3 centimeters of new snow over the past 72 hours and a 170 centimeter base. No new snow at Lake Louise, and they still have a 163 centimeter base. Mount Norquay has had 1 centimeter of fresh snow and a 91 centimeter base. Nakiska has also had 1 centimeter of new snow over the past 72 hours and a 132 centimeter base. No new snow at Whistler, but they still have a solid base of 240 centimeters. Panorama has a 120 centimeter base. No new snow at Whitefish, Montana, but they still have a 318 centimeter base. Have fun and play safe on the slopes this weekend. The International Air Transport Association says the outbreak of the novel coronavirus is threatening to erase $29 billion of revenue this year for global airlines, mostly Chinese carriers. The group says the disease has the potential to cause a 13% decline in demand for Asian carriers this year. The contraction comes at a time when Asian airline sales have been growing. The IATA says global air traffic will be reduced by almost 5%, marking the first overall decline in such annual demand since the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. Vancouver-based miner Teck Resources is reporting a loss of $891 million. It took an impairment charge related to its stake in the Fort Hills oil sands mine due to lower market expectations for future oil prices. That compares with a profit of $433 million in the fourth quarter of 2018. Revenue fell from $3.24 to $2.66 billion. Teck is also warning if Ottawa decides not to approve its Frontier Oil Sands mining project, it will take an impairment charge of about $1.13 billion. That decision is expected before the end of the month. Retail sales in our country came in flat in December at $51.6 billion. Economists had expected an increase of 0.1%. The flat reading followed growth of 1.1% in November. Stats Canada reports full-year retail sales for 2019 rose 1.6% from the year before to $615 billion. The federal and Alberta governments are helping Jacek Chocolate Couture expand production. Jacek is a Sherwood Park-based company which has won awards for its artisan and craft chocolate. Jacek will use the government funds to upgrade its operations, increase exports, and create new jobs. Federal Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Babeau and Alberta Agriculture Minister Devin Dreeshen say small businesses are critical to economic growth. The money comes from the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, which is a 5-year, $3 billion investment by federal, provincial, and territorial governments. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 100 points on the day to 17,843. The Dow was down 227 points to 28,992. The S&P 500 was down 35 points to 3337. The Nasdaq was down 174 points to 9576. Oil was down 42 cents to 53.46 per barrel. Natural gas was down a cent to $1.91. Gold was up 23.85 to 1643.41 an ounce, and silver was up 12 cents on the day to 18.49 an ounce. Wheat is at $225 per metric ton, barley's at $222, canola's at $4.58, and corn is at $258 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 90 cents to $118.25, feeder cattle were down 60 cents to $140.20, lean hogs were up 15 cents to $67.03, and the Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to 75.60 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the province is introducing a new funding model to help vulnerable kids across Alberta get the help they need. The government will provide $3.4 million per year for the next 3 years to support child advocacy centres in many regions, including Calgary and Edmonton. Funding has also been set aside for centres in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat should they become operational. Is there a chance that a social conservative could become the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada? Political science professor from the University of Lethbridge, Dr. Jeffrey Hale, gives us his thoughts next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. L'Arche Association of Lethbridge is holding their second annual benefit dinner and silent auction on Saturday, February 29th from 4:30 to 9 p.m. at the Multicultural Centre. Enjoy a delicious catered dinner and special guest speaker Michael McDonald. Tickets are $100, from which $60 tax receipts will be given. Support this worthy cause and purchase yours today by calling 403-328-3735, extension 4. For details, visit larchelethbridge.org. Come for a night of down-home fun to the Friends Winter Barn Dance on Saturday, March 7th, beginning at 7 p.m. at the Galt Museum and Archives. Wear your best Western hat and boots and dance the night away. Proceeds will go towards educational programs at the Galt. Tickets are $30 for adults, $20 for youth ages 11 to 17, and children 10 and under are free. Purchase yours by visiting galtmuseum.com. Come out to the largest home and garden show in southern Alberta. The 2020 Home and Garden Show is taking place from March 18th to the 21st at Exhibition Park in Lethbridge. Discover a variety of exhibitors, ranging from flooring and cabinets to hot tubs and fireplaces, and much, much more. Admission is $7 per person. Children under 10 can enter for free. Parking fee is $5. For more information, visit exhibitionpark.ca. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The Conservative leadership race is underway with tougher requirements this time around for potential candidates. Joining me now in studio to discuss this is Dr. Jeffrey Hale, political science professor at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome back to BCN.
Good to be with you, Hal.
Okay, let's talk about the potential candidates here for the Tories. Peter MacKay's name, Marilyn Gladue, Erin O'Toole, but there's also a social conservative, a Toronto lawyer by the name of Leslyn Lewis. What do we know about her?
She is from Jamaica originally. She's been here since she was 5 years old. She's focused on getting her education, her professional credentials. She's a practicing lawyer, and she's got a PhD in international law from Osgoode Hall, so she's nobody's dummy.
But does she stand a chance against the big names, the big stars like Peter MacKay?
Practically, no, but the purpose of newcomer social conservative candidates is to be a place for people to park a vote, signal a policy preference, and send a message to the party leadership that there is a block of votes out there that you ignore at your peril.
It seems, Dr. Hale, that it really is a two-horse race at this point in time. Peter MacKay, Erin O'Toole, but some pundits say that Peter MacKay really has the edge. What do you think gives him the edge?
I think, first of all, name recognition, the fact that he has been around for a very long time. Secondly, he has money in organization. He put the full $300,000 deposit down, from what I understand, which is a fair bit of money to part with at any one time. Everybody else is having to work to raise that money. I think the third factor is that he is seen as somebody who might be more appealing to the Liberal vote in Ontario and to parts of Atlantic Canada.
Because many people argue he's not a blue Tory, he's really a red Tory.
I think that is a reasonable, I think that's a reasonable assessment. He is a purely pragmatic politician who will go wherever the wind is blowing.
So what do you think it's going to take for the next person to become the leader of the federal Conservative Party? Is that they have to be maybe socially liberal but fiscally conservative?
I don't know that you have to be a thoroughgoing social liberal, but you have to be able to appeal to suburban and small-town Ontario, which will be the difference between winning and losing in all likelihood at the next election. You have to be somebody who can articulate consensus conservative principles effectively. In other words, if you are not somebody who can communicate well and communicate with some sense of the public good, conservatives have to work harder to win trust outside their core support, and being able to explain what you stand for and why is important. I think the third thing, and this we learned from Andrew Scheer, is that you have to be comfortable in your own skin before you can make other people comfortable to you. If you can't relate to yourself in public, it's going to be hard to get other people to relate to you.
How about being fully bilingual? How important is that? The reason I ask that is because of what happened with Peter MacKay recently, and they had in one of the papers in Quebec, "Good luck, mister," when he tried to speak en français, it didn't come out too well.
You have to be functionally bilingual. The Quebecers and French Canadians generally are about a quarter of the population, and just as any community wants to be treated with respect, being able to speak to a quarter of the population in the other of Canada's two official languages and make yourself understood, I think is necessary. It will not help you win Quebec, but it will get you a hearing in Ontario and New Brunswick.
Oh, interesting. Now, getting back to social conservatism for just a moment here, Dr. Hale, how much of a role do social conservatives play in some of these leadership elections?
I think they're a significant proportion of the membership, and as such, in a weighted one-person, one-vote environment, they can be a sizable group of votes. They will not all go in the same direction, but if they think you don't respect them, the same as any other community in the country, if they think you don't respect them, you're not going to get their vote by default.
So do you think the big two then, Peter MacKay, Aaron O'Toole, and maybe even Marilyn Gladue will stay away from hot button issues like, gay marriage, abortion, pro-life versus pro-choice?
I think they will try to avoid those because those are areas where the mainstream media will beat up on them. I think their capacity to appeal to social conservatives will depend on whether they are seen as people who can be trusted to protect their interests against the dominant liberal worldview that says they're deplorables who don't need to be respected at all, and that particularly with first-generation Canadians, that you show that you are comfortable with their values in their community, because frankly for those people on the religious side of the social conservative movement, there are a great many new Canadians who instinctively and identify with those values.
Why do you think it is that so many politicians are pressured into marching in gay pride parades?
Oh, it has become a litmus test for what the left describes as tolerance.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. And Aaron O'Toole said he's not going to march, not because of the fact that he doesn't support gay marriage, but because the police are never invited, like the Toronto Gay Pride Parade. That's his out. Peter MacKay says, yes, I'll definitely march.
Well, I think the notion of tolerance tends to be a one-way street in certain parts of our society. We see that periodically at the university, and you don't expect from others what you're not willing to give yourself.
How about some other potential candidates like Rick Peterson, the Alberta businessman? Does he stand a shot? I mean, putting down the 300K and saying, you know, I'm in.
Well, he still has to get the 3,000 memberships. He may get that.
Yeah.
He is an articulate and passionate individual, and if he can get the memberships, he will have a voice. But how much he can break through, given the fact that you have to go to 338 constituencies, is an open question.
What do you think the next Conservative leader really needs to win the next federal election? What qualities, characteristics?
I think you have to come up with a vision that treats Canadians as more than just a bunch of fragments that you are trying to put together based on pollsters' advice. We no longer, I think Jacques Parizeau was right. We are no longer a country in the traditional sense of the term. We are deeply divided on multiple levels: region, ethnicity, language, secular versus religious, and so on and so forth. And we see that with the way so many regional conflicts are reinforcing multiple solitudes in this country. Somebody who can bridge those solitudes in a respectful manner and make people feel that the person can identify with them will go a long way.
Maybe that's why a lot of people like Stephen Harper at the time when he was Prime Minister. I mean, he was from Toronto. He went to university out there, but then he grew up out west here in Alberta, so he had that connection to both Central Canada and the West.
And I think the capacity to relate to people in different regions is critical. And it's not simply a matter of hitting hot button issues, because that can be seen as pandering as well, but rather saying this is what we have in common, and it's not just the lowest common denominator, but it involves aspirations for things that the average family can identify with.
Let's talk about the pipeline protest, the railway blockade set up all across the country here. Many people wanting to support the Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs, even though it's already received the LNG pipeline project, the approval of the band councils, the local band councils. Why isn't the Prime Minister using and enforcing the rule of law? It's crippling our economy, these protests, the blockades.
I think the reason that he hasn't sent in the RCMP is that he is concerned that if it escalates further, he can't deal with it. And the only way...
You bring in the army?
They tried that at Oka and it didn't work very well. And I think this is part of the problem. We not only have a group of people who feel left out of the country, but we have a group of people who will use them to project their own agendas and their own interests independently of the well-being of Native peoples and First Nations. And given the solitudes that I talked about, means that if you can find a way of working with First Nations leaders to try to diffuse this, it's probably a better foundation to get resource projects built in the future.
And towards reconciliation
and
as well.
towards reconciliation. The fact that the idea that we're in it together as opposed to being eternal solitudes. So I have tremendous sympathy for the Native communities that have worked hard to ensure that their people's interests are represented in development projects. And I think it's really important to encourage that so that we have a win-win approach to development. Unfortunately, we have certain groups in society who take a zero-sum view of this stuff, that if we don't get our agenda, it doesn't matter if anybody else is better off.
Speaking of big projects coming up, the Tech Frontier Mine in northern Alberta. Many people say if that doesn't go through, if the Liberals kibosh it, you're going to hear a lot more talk of Western separation, Alberta separation. What are your thoughts?
Tech has become a symbol, and unfortunately it's a negative symbol on both sides of the regional and ideological divide. To get past this problem, there has to be something in it for everyone. And in as much as Tech has played by the rules, there is a tendency in Ottawa to change the rules every time every time the political winds change. And given the fact that it takes 10 to 15 years to get any major project done in this country, that is a dreadful signal to people you want to invest in future, because it means you cannot be trusted. At the same time, there are many people who feel there has to be a visible commitment on emissions reduction. What that looks like is open to negotiation. A lot of that negotiation is going on behind closed doors. So I think for tech to go through, there has to be something on it for all the different actors in the process. The suggestion to approve it on the assumption that it will never be built is too cynical by half. Unless we can find a way to address environmental and climate change issues at the same time as we do development, this country does not have a future.
Alberta's separation sentiment is at an all-time high right now, especially if tech falls through. But you're saying talk like that can really scare investment away from our province, like what happened with Quebec many years ago.
Well, we are a resource-based economy, and while I think it is important to start the longer-term process of transition to reduce the overall impact of resources in the economy, that shouldn't mean putting people out of work today. But if you separate tomorrow, if you can't get your products to Tidewater in the existing federation, what makes you think that you can get them to Tidewater as a separate country? And secondly, if business people do not think they can get their product to market, they are not going to invest in this province. Quebec decided to make that up by having the government invest in all sorts of things. That's how we got Bombardier and their eternal subsidies, and the company that has been molting subsidiaries shedding like a dog coming into a warm house from the cold. Okay. And this has been happening in that province for years. The government has started to move away from that in recent years, and the economy is a lot stronger for it.
But didn't it take like 30 years for their economy to rebound after all the talk of separation, where it came so close to Quebec separating?
Lucien Bouchard did a study in the late 90s showing that investment per capita in Quebec was 30% lower than the rest of the country. And that is what his economists called the separation fear discount. And Alberta, as long as the energy industry was doing well, had a far higher level of investment per capita, which is why Albertans have the highest incomes of any provincial residents in the country. The minute the industry went south, we still had a lot of people who were being well paid, but those people who were at the edges of the system found that there was no safety net there. And right. we have to diversify, but it's not something that happens overnight. You have to build an ecosystem where people feel that they can invest for the long term, not just for the quick buck.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spent a lot of time visiting countries in Africa, trying to win support for this UN security seat. How important is this really for Canada? Or is it a waste of taxpayers' dollars, really?
It depends how much credibility you attach to the UN, both as a place for projecting Canadians' interests and a place to work with other countries to support Canadian values. And right now, the UN does not have the strongest track record in either area. There are a lot of people who view this as a vanity project. I think if we are contributing to good governance in Africa, if we're contributing to economic opportunity in Africa, that's a good thing over the long term. But the kind of games that countries play in order to get the votes of authoritarian governments generally don't lend themselves to those outcomes.
Political science professor from the University of Lethbridge, Dr. Jeffrey Hale, thanks again for joining me in studio today.
Thank you.
Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel and a few others have published a lengthy Alberta manifesto in the Western Standard. To talk more about it is the Alberta correspondent of the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joins me from Edmonton. Tyler, does this have a little something to do with Alberta's separation?
Oh, just a little bit, Hal. Yeah, they basically say no ifs, ands, or buts that Alberta is an unequal partner in Confederation, and if something isn't done to address that, many Albertans are going to vote for independence. They conclude this letter, which is about 13 pages long. They conclude it by saying, one way or another, Albertans will get equality. So it's some pretty strong words in this. You know, I feel like we haven't heard a whole lot about Alberta alienation in the last little while, and this is ramping it right up.
You know, it's interesting. We had a political science professor, Dr. Jeffrey Hale from the U of L on our show recently, and he says when Quebec talked about separating, it took them 30 years to bring business back to the province because everybody bailed.
Yeah, you had massive exodus of people from Montreal and things like that. I think having covered this quite a bit in the last couple of years, I think a lot of this is a deeply, deeply emotional reaction to the downturn in the economy, the perceived slights against Alberta from the Trudeau Liberals. It's almost a shoot first and ask questions later sort of thing in many ways. I think where people say, well, we get out and then we'll solve our problems then. But that's been one of the things Jason Kenney has said when he's been asked about this. He says, "Look, we're fighting to make sure that Alberta energy is not landlocked right now. How do you propose to get Alberta's energy to market if we're an independent country?" But at any rate, we had 4 MPs: Glenn Motz, Arnold Viersen, Blake Richards, and Michelle Rempel-Garner write this thing and sign it. It lays out 4 reasons why they think Alberta is facing challenges and a whole litany of suggestions on how Alberta can become a more equal partner in Confederation.
Wow. The railway blockades continue in many regions of our country here. Protesters have thrown their support behind the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs who have a serious problem with the LNG gas pipeline project in northwestern BC. Tyler, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says the blockades are killing our economy and need to be torn down. Kenney and others are putting pressure on Prime Minister Trudeau to enforce the rule of law, but not much has happened yet.
That's true. There has been some slight progress, I would say, in some areas. There was a rail blockade in New Hazelton, BC, if you can find that on a map, that did come down. There was a temporary blockade that went up and down in Edmonton on Wednesday. But the big one, the most important one, is out near Belleville, Ontario, and that has brought the sort of railway network, the CN rail network, to basically a halt in Eastern Canada. So yes, as you said, Jason Kenney's had some really strong words about this. On Wednesday, Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan had a phone call with the Council of the Federation, I think it was, all the other premiers, and they were seeking this evening to have a phone call with Trudeau to discuss this ongoing issue. Now, to harken back to what we were just talking about, part of what the Buffalo Declaration talks about is, in a moment of national crisis, the West is feeling neglected in the railway dispute and things like that. It's maybe a tenuous thread, but that is certainly in there. And I think in some ways this letter comes at an interesting time when we're talking about the ability of the federal government to get a gas pipeline built. So there is the energy side of it, and also to sort of maintain some sort of, national unity in some ways, as I think tensions and tempers are a little bit inflamed on both sides of this thing.
The legislature is back next week, Tyler. That means we'll have a throne speech and a budget. What can we look forward to seeing?
Well, hard to say. The government, as always, tight-lipped on these things. What we certainly will see this time around in the budget, I think, is some of the more concrete steps this government is planning on taking to get us back to balance. Now, when we talked about the fall 2019 budget, there were some small cuts, some belt tightening. You could possibly see the cleaver come out this time. There's been, just today, there was a big announcement on the sort of ripping up, I guess you could say, of the physician contracts, changing some billing stuff around. And you also had earlier this week some notes on education. So basically what I think we're going to see is we're going to get some of the details behind some of the policy proposals that have sort of been hinted at over the last little while. And we're also going to get, I think, a good look at what the revenue side of things looks like. We've talked a lot about expenditures over the past year under Jason Kenney's government. We will certainly get a look at what resource revenues look like, what taxation revenues have looked like, and things like that. So, it's going to be, and I think what this is going to mean is quite a raucous session of the legislature, because if we're talking cuts, I mean, any cut, the NDP is going to scream bloody murder. But if when we see this plan start to get laid out, the NDP almost has their attack script written for them on this stuff. So I think we're going to see, like last time around, a pretty rowdy return to business here in Edmonton.
So maybe some more earplugs will be dished out once again by the
Oh
UCP.
yeah, some earplugs. Maybe Rachel Notley will get booted out again. Fun and games for everyone.
Now, speaking of the UCP, they suggested some changes to the grant funding formula for kindergarten to grade 12. Funding will be done in terms of a 3-year average of enrollment.
Yeah, so that's the idea. The idea here is to put in place a more stable and predictable funding model. Now, what critics say about this is that what it actually does is it's looking backwards on enrollment, and so the system will always be playing catch up, so it'll always be underfunded. Now, that's a perfect example of that's where we're going to see more details come out in the budget next week. But yes, so funding for education is certainly going to be one of the things that is in the budget that reporters will be looking for. You know, the last budget had big changes to the post-secondary funding setup. So this time we're now looking at kindergarten to grade 12 and how that's all going to shake out and then be interpreted down the line by local education authorities.
Suncor got approval for a 40,000 barrel per day facility near Fort McMurray. Now that's the Meadow Creek West facility, Tyler. I used to be the morning man at the radio station up there many years ago. But the project may actually be delayed.
Yeah, so there's certainly some talk of delaying it from the company itself. Now, what this means in terms of the approval is that the company can now go ahead and seek its local development and environmental permits. So, you know, this is just a step forward in an oil sands project that could move forward at some point. At the same time as we're having this whole spat with Ottawa about the Tech Frontier project.
This week, the Alberta Federation of Labour claimed that our public pensions are being used to prop up the fossil fuel industry. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so their concern is that AIMCO, which manages public pensions, is investing in, well, what they say is a risky industry that's dying out, and they should sort of divest from it. Now, AIMCO, for its part, says that its investment in petroleum industries are sort of on par and standard with what other pension managers are doing. Now, the reason this matters is because we're also having this conversation about the Fair Deal panel and whether or not Alberta should have its own pension plan. Now, part of the line of attack that labor groups and the New Democrats are going to be rolling out and have sort of already said and have already telegraphed is that this Alberta pension plan, is a slush fund for Jason Kenney to fund whatever he wants. Now, that's not exactly how the pension system works, but that is, I think, where you're going to see major attacks from the left in this province is over the security of pensions, and we have already seen that in various ways. And so this was just sort of another little step, I would say, in the escalation of that line of attack against the Conservatives.
Now, you touched a little bit earlier on the Tech Frontier Mine project, Tyler. There seems to be a lot of back and forth on this Northern Alberta project. The feds want our province to enforce its 100 megaton cap on carbon emissions from the oil sands. And Government House Leader Jason Nixon says, hey, Ottawa, you're moving the goalposts here.
Yeah, he's basically said that this was never part of the deal, that this was not where we had discussed this project going, and that it's gone through the assessments and all that sort of thing, and it just needs to go ahead now. So there should be a decision coming on that really quickly. Now, I mean, what it seems like here is there's sort of a carrot and a stick thing happening, where the federal government is trying to. I'll back up a little bit. Because the federal government finds itself in this situation where it's looking to approve a major carbon-intensive resource project, but also is trying to make concrete progress on its climate change goals, they've opened themselves up to the accusation of hypocrisy. And I think they certainly, realize that. And that's part, I imagine, of what is going on here, where they're saying, approval, but maybe it's going to be contingent on you being a little bit more bullish on emissions and things like that. So who knows what's going to happen with that? We should know soon, though. I mean, I feel like we've been watching that one for ages, and it should be by the end of the month. We should have a decision on that, even if the decision's just to kick the can down the road a little ways.
Well, I know a lot of Albertans are definitely banking on that, so to speak. Now, the province has launched a survey about auto insurance, Tyler. Does this mean we may be soon be getting a bit of a break when it comes to our auto insurance rates?
Well, one can hope. As a matter of fact, I phoned my auto insurance the other day and said, I'm coming up for renewal in the next few months here. What's going to happen? And they said, oh, well, you got to call back in July when it when it renews. So, that's one of the things that I found interesting about this is why they are now doing this consultation after they've lifted the caps. So, you know, it's part of this larger general theme of consultation this government has been embarking upon. So, you know, maybe it is an opportunity for people to give their say, and maybe things will get a little bit financially easier for people on that front. But yeah, hard to say.
The Calgary Lougheed Centre received over $100 million recently. What is the money going towards?
It's going towards the hospital. So, you know, this government, I think, is quite concerned about the perception that there's going to be closing hospitals and blown up hospitals from the Klein years. And obviously, that is not something that they want. That's not an image of themselves that they want. They were quite strong, firmly against closing rural hospitals when the report came out a few weeks ago on that. And so now they're putting in quite a significant investment in Calgary. Now, I think probably part of that is to spend some money in advance of the budget. You know, they can point to that as a positive expenditure and things like that. So, but yes, spending money. And this has just been a busy week in terms of, like, that's a little announcement in the scheme of things, but there's this pipeline crisis going on the other side of it. Just an awful lot happening this week.
The Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining me once again from Edmonton. Thanks again, Tyler.
Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at PCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.